So when I got to know Duff, I went to his house, me and Jeff Rouse, the bass player in Loaded, who I knew a little bit too at the time, and I still do. But we went to Duff's house, and he read his life story in front of us while we played guitars and just kind of worked out that whole thing. Okay, maybe this song would go here, right? And so I'm getting to know this guy in his living room, telling me his life story, like officially. You know what I mean?
Jeez.
It was wild, man. Really, really cool.
Hey folks, Brian Smith here with Dream Path Podcast, where we get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. Today we talk to Jeff Fielder. Jeff has been a professional musician for over 25 years. He came up in the late 80s and early 90s, the same time I did in Washington State. And so we have a lot in common and a lot to talk about in this interview. If you are into music history, you are going to learn a lot listening to Jeff because he was there for a lot. He has seen a lot. He has collaborated with some amazing musicians, and including Mark Lanegan. He was Mark Lanegan's musical director for 10 years. He's toured with Amy Ray of Indigo Girls, did that for 8 years, and is still collaborating with her. I saw him perform recently at Sleight of Hand Cellars, a Vax-only event in Seattle, and he was opening for Alan Johannes. This is before the interview. He described himself to the crowd in the show as, and there's just a joke that he made, the Forrest Gump of rock and roll. And I chuckled, the crowd chuckled, but as I was preparing for the interview and researching and listening to his work and looking at YouTube videos and just noticing this guy has been everywhere and he appears everywhere. It's kind of amazing to see one guy just in such an eclectic collection of music throughout the country. And it's a testament to who he is and what he brings to the table. He brings his A game every single time. He's a professional musician, and he wants to lift up everybody around him. That's the sign of a good collaborator. They're not trying to jump in and be, have the spotlight. And that's just not who Jeff is, even though he is a good frontman. He has a solo album out from 2006 called The Last Disguise, and it is a solid album. Bluesy, he's got some folk tunes in there, but a lot of blues vibe. He's got a slide guitar, so he's got some rock tunes, and it's a really solid album. He also has an album out, several albums, with his wife Tekla Waterfield. The most recent album is called Trouble in Time. Fantastic album. Check it out. He can be seen on Duff McKagan's biopic and concert film, which is now streaming on Amazon Prime, I believe. He has some fun stories about Duff McKagan in this interview. And he can also be seen on Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations in an episode with Mark Lanegan featuring some dive bars and ballads. So I've gone really fast, just kind of ticking through as many things that I could think of that kind of get you oriented before you jump into this interview with Jeff. But I felt that I owed it to you to sort of prepare you for this trip that you're about to go on, because it's a fun one. But it is helpful to kind of have that background information before you hear the chat. So without further ado, let's jump into my chat with Jeff Fielder.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Fielder, welcome to Dream Path Podcast.
How do you do, sir?
Oh, I'm great. Other than the wildfire smoke here in Yakima, it is, we are in basically ground zero, belly of the beast for some pretty big fires. And so if I cough, I'm going to try to mute myself if I cough into the mic, but that's why it's not COVID.
Well, keep it real.
Right.
Yakima. That's where you're at. I was going to ask you where you were.
Yeah, I'm
sure.
Mostly in Yakima. I have an office in Seattle and a home in Seattle, but most of my family's here. My kids are here, so I try to operate out of Yakima as much as I can, as much as I can tolerate it. But definitely having. I prefer the West Side vibe for sure. So you have rural roots yourself. I understand that you. You hail from Alaska.
Yes, sir. The big state, the last frontier.
Yeah. So what do you remember about Alaska? How old were you when you left that state, and how formative was it for you?
How far of a move?
No,
Is that what the second question was?
how formative was it for you in terms of just
Oh,
the
I see what you mean.
experience of growing up in that rural environment?
I highly recommend growing up in Alaska. And then I also highly recommend getting out of Alaska eventually.
Okay.
No, it's beautiful up there is the thing. And then, so I was there until I was 12, I think, 12 or 13, right in there.
Mm-hmm.
Summer between 7th and 8th grade. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, I was in Eagle River first, which is outside of Anchorage. So that was the area we were in, kind of the Anchorage area.
Mm. Outside the big
Wasilla
city.
next. Yeah, the big city, which was pretty small. We went back recently because my wife is also from there. I didn't know her back then, but it just happenstance. But yeah, So we went back together and visited my brothers and whatnot. I'm glad we got that trip in. That was in September of 2019.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Right
I'm
under
glad we got that in.
wire.
Right under the wire, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But no, I loved it there, and I remember it really, really, really fondly and well. I have kind of a crazy memory, so I remember my childhood like a lot,
Mm-hmm.
And no, I really dug it. It was funny. We had like pen pals in grade school from somewhere else. I think like the East Coast maybe, and they all assumed like kids, that were our age, and they all assumed that we lived in igloos and. You know what I mean? Like, had penguins everywhere.
That's
They
funny.
were surprised to learn that we had Taco Bells and whatnot.
This is the first time hearing that you did not live in igloos. So thanks for clarifying. No, I had that same belief growing up in Washington State. Anything anywhere close to the North Pole, like Alaska, even though Alaska is not that close to the North Pole, but yeah, you always think of those tropes. But
Yeah.
so in terms of your musical formation, when did that start? Did that start in Alaska, or did you pick up music later?
Yeah, it's just one of those things that was just, I was into it as soon as I could do anything, as soon as I could talk or whatever. I was just musical somehow, and I'm not sure why. It doesn't really run in the family or anything. Although I had older brothers that all played, it was just kind of part of the culture then. But not particularly a musical family. Besides our sort of brood, everybody played in my immediate family. Mm-hmm. There was a fiddle guy. His name was Jimmy Fielder back in the early 1900s. That was the fiddle champion of Texas, apparently.
Wow.
But other than him, it kind of skipped all those next generations until it landed on us.
And I understand your family goes back to Texas, right? I mean, you have deep roots in Texas as well.
Texas, yeah, all around there. Mm-hmm.
So your musical education, did you ever have any formal music education, or was it all like guitar lessons and playing and collaborating with other folks to learn?
Well, yes and no. I would consider myself almost self-taught, but I did have guitar lessons when I was 9. I kind of started as like sort of after school stuff, and I had this kind of, there was a music school, kind of a music store / school in the middle of Eagle River. It's very, very small and community oriented. And my guitar teacher was this kind of church lady. She wore these big long dresses and would do kind of nursery rhyme type stuff. I very much disliked it, but I did it. I was, I wouldn't say I was forced to do it, but I was supposed to practice every day for 30 minutes or whatever. And then I had the lesson every week, and I did that for about, I don't know exactly, maybe 6-7 months, something like that. And I knew my way around the guitar by the end of that. Mm-hmm. Although I really didn't enjoy it because I didn't identify with any of the music we were doing,
Yeah.
And then eventually I sort of graduated to a new teacher, and I had him for a very short time, but he was kind of a metalhead. I went from one extreme to the other. And he was teaching me like Dokken and
wow.
and Rat. I remember learning Round and Round on my little nylon string.
Round
like
and round.
Quarter.
What
Yeah,
comes
I could rock
around,
Round
goes
and Round.
around. Yeah, that's a great song.
Yeah, it's a good tune.
I used to roller skate
So
to that
anyways,
song.
yeah, man. And then we moved away from that town, so I stopped lessons. And that's when I took it up kind of seriously after that, because I knew my way around it. And then I was well into music by then. And so then I started, and there's nothing else to do in Alaska, and I didn't ski or play hockey or anything like that. You know what I mean? So the winters were very long, and I just found myself in my room by myself playing guitar all the time.
Yeah.
All night long. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like the lack of people, the lack of metropolitan inner city, population, which provides a lot of opportunities for social experiences, kind of worked to your favor in terms of like keeping you focused on something, because what else is there to do if you're not playing hockey or doing some other outdoor sport?
Right. Yeah. And I was young enough to be, I always had a lot of friends. I wasn't too antisocial, and it wasn't really that, it wasn't that small of a town. It was still there was people everywhere, we had a big school and everything. It was pretty normal as far as I could tell, it's kind of like, if I could compare it to anything, it'd be kind of like Texas, some of the smaller towns outside of Austin, maybe, and it was really laid back, man. Everybody was really chill back then, So it was a pretty easy going, I had a nice, easy, relative childhood, just just moving right along, just playing guitar and digging on Masters of the Universe or whatever I was into. It was kind of this weird transition from comic books into rock and roll,
Comic books. Yeah. I remember Silver Surfer and a lot of,
Totally.
I collected comic books, but I never read them. I was into more of the imagery and things like that. But I was, what a failure in terms of a comic book geek. If you're not into the literary aspect of it, I felt like I was just a poser.
Well, I read them, but I was more into the art too. In fact, I could have gone that way. I wasn't, I still, it's been a minute because music kind of took over in the last decade or so. But I also draw, I was pretty well into it. And there was a period where I felt like I could be a cartoonist or some sort of comic artist. I'm still really quite into that stuff. These are mine up here. But back then, yeah, you can't really see them. They're way back there. But back then, yeah, I could have, because I drew, I was into drawing the superheroes and all that stuff. And so when it went into rock and roll, it was very, because Jimi Hendrix and Jimmy Page, they were so flamboyant in the way they dressed and all that stuff. They seemed like superheroes to me, kind of. So it was a very seamless transition.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, well, you have these icons and these heroes that we look up to, and certainly, Metallica and I understand Ozzy Osbourne was an influence for you, and Randy Rhoads, and
unbelievable.
These people that become our heroes. They're just people we look up to and want to emulate.
Yeah, I love Ozzy, man. I really do.
How did your parents respond to those types of musical influences? Were they pretty, supportive, or did you have parents that were a little more conservative and, trying to discourage you from at least listening to records backwards?
No, there was nothing like that. What happened with me, it was interesting actually. So when they were little kids in Texas growing up, and this is in this early 60s, it was like super religious. They were like Southern Baptist. And it was very strict in the household back then. Same parents, by the way, And so by the time they were teenagers, they completely rebelled against all that stuff. And it was a little bit tricky for my mom and dad. So when they had me, and then I have a younger sister too, when they had us, they were just like, okay, we know not to do that. So we were like really free of all that kind of stuff. And as far as them, once I got into music, then yeah, they were fully supportive, especially my mom. Now my dad was kind of more of like, get a job and do something, but he was not discouraging music. He knew I had a kind of a talent for it or whatever. So there was certainly no discouraging. And as far as music goes, as far as like, I think my dad secretly might have been like, oh, these whatever it was, but they never bothered me about it. You know what I mean? I remember seeing Kiss and stuff on TV and it looking kind of scary, but they didn't really care. By that point, they knew that, whatever. So no, they didn't bother me about it. Yeah.
So by the time you land in Washington State, I assume you went straight from Alaska to Washington.
Yeah.
And so by the time you get to Washington, it sounds like you're pretty immersed in, musical like education, not formal education, but at least that's your thing is music and guitar. Is that
Oh yeah,
accurate?
certainly. And bass. I had a music teacher in junior high that was very influential on me. And he taught me how to play bass, and I played drums in concert band. And that was probably as far as like early days, that was the biggest growth I ever had. And he was a very influential teacher on me. He was probably the most, certainly. And maybe one of the only, because when I moved to Washington, I don't know. I'm sure my school had good teachers, but I didn't have any of them.
Yeah. So they weren't inspiring you academically.
Not in the least. They didn't really take an interest in, me or, a lot of the kids. There was so much. I had never seen school like that because in Alaska, everything was really together and you could have all these different groups, and we had it was a little bit different because there's a lot of native people in Alaska. But it was all really integrated and nobody really broke off into these groups. Like, everybody had their own thing. Like there would be a rocker and a jock and a blah, 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 and a prep or whatever, but we all got along. And then in Washington, everything was very cliquey. And man, I didn't have one. You know what I mean? I couldn't find a place. So those were tricky years. And the teachers were kind of the same way. They had their favorite kids or whatever. So when I tried to get in the music programs, they just kind of literally laughed at me. And I'm like, all right, man, whatever. So I feel like that kind of stunted my growth in a lot of ways, which was a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
But I don't hold any grudges, whatever. It's all good. But I could read music up to that point. And when I didn't continue that into like actual music school, they wouldn't even let me in the band, which was really weird. I just thought that was weird. I think it's because I had long hair and I just didn't match the, whatever they wanted. It just really bummed me out at the time. So I kind of did kind of rebelling against all those teachers and all that stuff,
Yeah.
But I was a good kid. I wasn't like, too much of a mess.
Well, you're such an aficionado. I mean, you're such an amazing guitarist in terms of like blues and jazz influences. And so you're a great lead guitarist, you're a great rhythm guitarist all around. And how much of an impediment is it to not read music, given the session work that you do, the touring that you do, and the folks that you have to basically jump in and help record an album or help, perform on a tour? Right.
There's a joke that says, how do you get a guitar player to turn down? It's that put sheet music in front of them. Right. So, I wish I did. And there was a lot of times I was going to like kind of study how to do that, like go back to reading music and all that stuff, but I just kind of didn't have the patience. But what I did have the patience for was to really learn how to, because I can pick anything up really quickly. Like it's not unusual for me to learn like whole sets in a day. And, I'm able to kind of retain that stuff. And I don't like to look at notes. If I really have to, I'll write down notes. So I have my own way of writing charts, and I can follow lead sheets quite easily, like chord structures. And I know enough. I know what the notes mean rhythmically, you know what I mean? But sight reading is a whole different thing. People just put, like those jazz guys, and they just put the music in front of me, and you can just nail it.
Right.
I don't have that. I really don't. But I am very intuitive, and I can read number charts, those Nashville charts. Those guys are great. I've known, I've got to know some of these Nashville and Muscle Shoals session guys pretty well. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that. There's number charts.
No, have not heard of it.
Yeah. So if you got a 1, a 4, and a 5, for instance, in a song, those are terms for the 1 chord, the 4 chord. And so there's 6s and 9s and whatever, and they can chart out any song in any key will have those numbers. So instead of writing a chord chart, you can just write the number chart, and it can be in any key. The songwriter can put a capo on and be like, we're going to be a half step up now, and it doesn't matter because you're reading the numbers and not the chords.
Right.
It's a thing, and it's almost exclusive in Nashville. It's like the way that people do it.
Really?
It's the way they do sessions, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's really quick, yeah.
When they say, okay, we're a half step up or down, and people are capoing, are you capoing, or are you just able to seamlessly, move around the keyboard or the fretboard?
It just depends on what feels right because, there's a lot. I'm not afraid of a capo. In fact, somebody gave me the compliment recently that like, you're not afraid of a capo. That's good with electric guitar because I guess it's kind of rare apparently. But I really like it. But sometimes I'll be in a different position than whoever it is that I'm playing with. And so that is a different voicing. And other times I'll just go completely without it. And, it just kind of depends on what what everybody wants to hear out of the amplifier.
Right. So how did junior high and high school go for you in Washington, in terms of making the decision for you about the direction you wanted to go? And obviously you went into music, but were you ever considering like, you know what, I'm going to give engineering a try or even, art or drawing because you at least had the talent, the core talent for that?
Yeah. The drawing thing I kind of let go of as far as being professional at it earlier than that. There was a time where I was actually like really I was meeting kind of comic artists and people that drew children's books and things like that. Because I was really into kind of caricatures and sort of, that kind of thing. And sort of I liked, and then later on I get into sort of like R. Crumb, sort of that 60s underground comic stuff. And I just love that stuff. But anyways, that ship had kind of sailed and it was just something just for me. And as far as music goes, in high school, so there was a couple questions there. So as far as high school goes, there were sort of two sections. I was playing throughout the whole thing, but the front part of my junior high school experience was terrible as far as socially, but it didn't bother me. You know what I mean? It didn't really bother me all that much. I could, I didn't really care about all that. But when because we were in Washington and, Seattle adjacent. So when the whole Seattle thing happened, I was in high school, I was, sophomore, junior in high school.
And what years are we talking about here?
This is like 90. Well, I graduated in 93. And so, 90, 91, 92. It was totally high school. And so when that stuff was hitting, it became the thing. And I was already long haired and wearing flannels and, playing guitar to Les Paul, you know what I mean? And so all of a sudden I went from the nerd to the ultra super cool kid.
That's a stroke
and we were
of
in
luck.
the super, super like the popular kids, you know what I mean? Which was a trip being in both things, And I remember kind of my some of my friends, which I never like shunned anybody or anything. Like it wasn't about that. But they were like, "You changed, man. You're hanging out with all those dicks." But some of those dicks are still my friends right now.
Right on.
But anyways, it was funny. But yeah, when that all changed over, man, and it kind of came my way, it was so funny because when Pearl Jam hit, oh my God. That was a new world, man.
No kidding.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So
really
we would play the assemblies.
defined the whole era. Nirvana and Pearl Jam.
Oh my God, man. It was exciting back then. It was really exciting. I don't know if that'll ever happen again. I think it's just different now for kids, but when those bands were cracking, and I remember like somebody got like a bootleg of Temple of the Dog before it came out. And we were listening to that, just blown away, man. It's really early on. Temple of the Dog was pretty early on. And wow, man. Yeah. I remember hearing like Say Hello to Heaven on this like really jacked up cassette tape, you know what I mean? But it was before anybody else heard it. I thought that was really cool. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you and I are part of the same. I mean, I'm a couple years older than you. I graduated in 1990, but I had the good fortune of working in a record store and playing in a band. So I kind of had a portal into Pacific Northwest music and grunge in particular. In terms of Screaming Trees were just right up north of me because 30 miles north of Yakima,
Ellensburg.
But then I also had an amazing experience of seeing Mudhoney play in Bellingham at I think it was it was in the gym at Western Washington University, and Nirvana frickin' opened for Mudhoney, and it was it was a rock the vote $4 a ticket thing. And what I'm speaking to is your point about how kids today just don't have that buzz and excitement about bands that you and I had.
It's
back
not about
then.
music. It's about other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I just feel like we were part of something really, really special. And for me, I really wasn't part of it. I was just an observer, although I was playing in a band. But you were like, that seems like your portal into making all of these connections and amazing collaborations over the years. So what was your first, I know that you became cool because, you're wearing the flannel, you're good at guitar, you're playing in bands and that type of thing. But what was your portal into networking and making the connections that allowed you to play with all these people and form all of these long-lasting, decades-long relationships in music?
Yeah. Well, that happened years and years later, and it's Seattle's a small town. So if you're in it long enough and you're doing it, just, on any decent level, you'll meet somebody, because they're just all still around here, Eddie Vedder lives like over there somewhere, he's just kind of right over there. But specifically, there was a couple things, and they all happened, completely isolated from one another. Because once I really got studious, much later, kind of in my 30s, I decided to, just throw everything at the wall, just like as many, and just work as much as possible and do as many gigs as possible, just in any genre, any area, because I just wanted to meet people, and I just wanted to play music with people, you know what I mean, and meet cool guys. And then there was a couple things. So there was meeting Andrew McKagan, who was in a band called Shuggy at the time, but he's kind of just a network. He's a wicked, awesome guitarist, but he's also just really personable, and everybody liked Andrew, so everybody kind of just hung out, and he just knew everybody, and he ended up working for the Music Museum here, the EMP, which is now the Mopop, and he booked the Triple Door for a while, and he's just got connections, you know what I mean? So at one point, it's on YouTube, there was a anniversary concert for the Pike Place Market, right? And I ended up being in the house band. A lot of people like the way I play bass, so I'd end up being the bass player and kind of these kind of house band situations. And on that gig, we brought all these, pretty big names, including Sean Smith and Stone Gossard and Mike McCready, and kind of this endless, and we did these rehearsals, and we did the gig, and it was kind of a lot of stuff. And that's when I met Stone and Mike, and Stone in particular, me and him like just hit it off. I don't know what it was, but like we'd work together now, It's all, and that all stems from that particular thing, that Pike Place Market thing. And then Lanegan, that's a whole other long story, but it's a totally roundabout thing. It has nothing to do with Seattle. It comes out of meeting Isabel Campbell, and she's from Scotland. And I met her first through another guy. And then that, I could tell you all about that too, but maybe we should get there. But you know what I mean? So that was a different avenue.
Right, right. And so Isabel what is her connection to the Pacific Northwest? And forgive my ignorance if I should know this, but from Scotland.
So do you know who I'm talking about? Do you know who Isabel Campbell is?
No.
Okay. So her and Mark Lanegan made 3 records together.
Okay.
In the 2000s, and they're excellent. She was originally in a band called Bell and Sebastian, and they're Scottish. And then she went off and did some solo stuff, and she wanted to have this foil, to her. She has a very sweet, very soft voice, and she wanted to kind of her Lee Hazelwood to her, Nancy Sinatra. And her boyfriend at the time, if I'm not mistaken, this is the story, suggested Mark Lanegan. And she had never heard of him, but she listened to some of the stuff, which was all kind of rock oriented at the time. And she's like, "Well, his voice is amazing, so it'd be great." So she just contacted him, and then they ended up making these records together. And she would send the stuff to Mark in the United States. She would be in Scotland. She's got her band in Scotland, and then they would just do the thing remotely. He would send back the tracks, right? And so eventually she wanted to meet some American musicians and just be kind of more, she would just like that whole Americana vibe, And after the second record leading into the third record, she had gone to Memphis to this thing called the Folk Alliance, which is a music conference where people play and sort of take over hotels, whatever. And she went to that to meet people, and she ended up meeting Calexico and Victoria Williams, which was really cool. This kind of Tucson, Arizona kind of section of people, kind of musicians from there. Nico Case is out there and all that stuff. And she ended up meeting my friend Phil Hurley, who was out there playing with his band, and he's a wicked guitar player. So she was looking for a guitar player, and she's like, "Hey, would you be keen to playing with me?
I love it.
I'll play in a band with Mark Lanegan. Maybe you would like to play our guitarist for the American leg of the tour."
Well done.
And
He
didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it, and we were friends, so he just gave her my phone number.
What?
And that was it. And then he told me, and I was fully aware I had the first record. Which I was just like, no way. And at this point in my life and career, I was just over it. It was not going well. And I'd just been plugging away forever and not getting anywhere. And I was just kind of lost. And so it was pretty good timing. And so a month and a half later, she called me from Scotland, and it sounded, you know what I mean? It was so weird. And we just talked, and she flew to America, and I met her in Tucson, Arizona, and we did a recording with Calexico, and it was wild because that was the first time I'd really done anything sort of, outside of my own circles, as far as that. And then one thing led to another, and we made the third record together with Mark, and that's when we met. That's when I met Larry for the first time. Was it in L.A. recording the record that became Hawk, which was the third of the three Mark Lanegan and Isabel Campbell records. And I had kind of quite a bit to do with that, actually, as far as like kind of arrangements and,
nice,
all of that business. And then I ended up in the touring band, blah, blah, blah. I got to know Mark, and he invited me to join him. And
here we are. Yeah. Well, thank you for that history lesson. And
that's the synopsis. Yeah.
This demonstrates just how challenging this research project was to get ready for this interview of you, Jeff, because I think you described yourself at the show at Sleight of Hand Cellars with Al Johannes as the Forrest Gump of rock and roll. I think that's what you said. And I was like,
that's totally true,
you just
man.
like appear everywhere, and throughout history, you can just go back and see, Where's Waldo? You could see Jeff there somewhere.
It's totally clicked like that. Yeah.
Recording and touring and Isabel Campbell. I can't believe that I have not heard those albums. So I need to check those out.
Great records. All three of them. The first one, though, I must say in particular, I mean, it's a bona fide classic. Mm-hmm. And Mark singing on it is really cool because it's a different kind of style.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting word, foil, because Mark, his style and what he brings to a performance is so singular, so unique. I interviewed Moby a couple of months ago.
Right, yeah.
About his new album, Reprise, and Mark performs with Chris Christopherson on one of their tracks. And I forget the name of the track, but it is like so gravelly and so dark.
Yeah. It's some serious weight right there. Yeah.
It is. It's just really heavy. And and we talked about this, Moby and I, about this, when you hear a voice and there are just certain voices that have seen some shit. And both, Christopherson and Lanegan are both those types of voices,
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah,
so
it's as real as it gets.
So in terms of touring with Lanegan, tell us what that looks like when, are you part of, because I don't know a lot about touring musicians in terms of the business relationship that is formed there. Are you hired to play, say we'll pay you for, X amount of dollars for this entire tour, or we'll give you, a percentage of, the ticket sales for each of these?
No.
Is it different from musician to musician and band to band, or how does that work? And I'm not asking obviously for specific numbers, but just generally.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is different from band to band, but generally if it's a major touring act or somewhat like that, you know what I mean? Where it's like, on that level where it's like a world thing, then no, you get like you get kind of a weekly rate, or whatever you work out beforehand. Because there's management and things like that. Mark, I think would set certain parameters, and then I would deal with the management people. I never talked to Mark directly about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Until later, I did ask him for a raise at one point. And he didn't even know what I was talking about. But it worked out in my favor. But
never hurts to ask,
but
right?
no, you just kind of work it out. I mean, it's a very blue collar, I consider a touring musician to be very a blue collar situation, meaning that it's like, it's not real cushy,
Right.
like you think it might be like real, what do you call it? Like glamorous and all that stuff, And
Right.
it's got its moments, don't get me wrong, but most of the time, man, it's like, you're down in the trenches, man, especially with old Lanny, those were like,
Right.
they were hardcore,
And you're not staying at the Four Seasons typically.
You know what, man? Especially when it was the two of us, and it was kind of a one-off every once in a while, and maybe the venue or wherever we were playing, the festival or whatever it was, would be like, kind of hooking us up. I've stayed in some pretty nice places, man. I gotta say, you know what I mean?
Nice.
But like if it was a tour, like it was a proper, 3-month tour, you know what I mean? Is dirty old bus, and you know what I mean? They would kind of throw us a bone like 6 weeks in, we get like our own room somewhere, you know what I mean? That's kind of like okay guys, but I didn't mind that stuff, man, you know what I mean? It's good you can't, Mark's gonna do it forever, but I don't know if I could do that forever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
But it was certainly I wouldn't trade it for the world, man. It was really something. We were those tours were bad. They weren't for the faint of heart. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It really, makes a grown up out of you.
So,
But
your musical career. I mean, I'm trying to break your musical career down into different categories, and you've got recording. You're a session guitarist. You tour internationally with a number of bands: Indigo Girls, Amy Ray, Mark Lanegan. And then you have your solo work, and you also have your work with Tekla, your wife, Tekla Waterfield.
Yeah.
So where do you see your highest and best use as a musician, if you even look at it that way, in terms of like where you really want to be spending the majority of your time? Is it writing? Is it collaborating? You do so much in music. I'm just trying to figure out where you really want to be as opposed to need to be to pay the bills.
Right. Oh man, I've been trying to figure that out forever. I think at the base of all that, at least when I first started working with Isabel and Amy, all of that stuff kind of happened at the same time. A lot of it. Around 2010, 2009, 2011. I kind of met all these people. And I really felt like I was extremely fortunate because at that point, and even now, it's carried over until now, but like I was able to work with really kind of special artists, I felt, and I wasn't ever doing music that I felt was, stuff I didn't like or stuff that I thought was, you know what I mean? It was always kind of very art oriented, which I really appreciated that, and I appreciated it fully, and I wanted to represent it properly, and all of that stuff. So I really fell into kind of luckily into an area where I was working with very fine musicians and songwriters and singers, I was always very proud of the work I was doing with whoever it was that I happened to be around, so that was really a nice thing, and it kind of spoiled me rotten in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? Because even locally, I was able to work with some really special songwriters and really, do some really cool stuff. And so as far as that session thing goes, and being a hired guy, yeah, there is some of that. But generally, my MO is if I'm in the project, then I'm in the project. I'm not just hired to do a piece of it. I'm an integral part of the structure of that particular, device. And that's just kind of the way it is. And as I've gotten older and more, into that stuff, then that's kind of the thing. So if you want me in the band, I'm happy to do it, but just know that, like, you know what I mean?
You've got opinions.
It's not necessarily that, you know what I mean? Because I'm certainly not going to take anything over. I mean, my role very well, in whatever capacity it is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it just happens that I'll, end up being sort of integral to it,
Yeah.
It just happens that way. I don't force it on anybody. Certainly I would never, act that way. You know what I mean? It just kind of happens naturally, you know what I mean? And I think it's beneficial for the for the overall music, you know what I mean? Because I can tell when somebody's just hired to do a gig. I can totally tell. And when in as opposed to them having a relationship with the artist and the band, you know, as a whole, you know, I can, you know, I think that people, even if they don't know, they can tell subconsciously, you know.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that about your work as I was preparing for the interview and just seeing these long relationships that you've formed, and you know the amount of time that you've spent playing and performing with Indigo Girls, for example. And I've probably seen you. I've seen Indigo Girls probably more than any other band live over the last couple of decades. Cool. Yeah, so I'm sure I've seen you perform, especially in the Pacific Northwest. If you've played at the zoo.
Well, I've mostly been in Amy's solo band more than the Indigo Girls itself, although I do sit in with them quite often, especially when they come to the Northwest, and I'll do a little run and sit in with the girls. But mostly I'm playing with Amy's solo thing, you know, and I've been doing that for a good 9 years now. I was slated to join the band because a lot of times they just do a duo or a trio when they tour. But in 2020, they were going to tour with a band because a new record out, blah, blah, blah. And I was going to be the guitar player on that. And then, of course, all that stuff got, thwarted.
Right. No kidding.
But we'll see about next year. We'll see what happens then. But I love all those people. They're great. I mean, it's like family, you know what I mean? They're really great.
So what is it about the Indigo Girls that you enjoy in terms of that musical experience and that relationship? Because, and I'll preface this question with my observation that Indigo Girls, when they play on stage, seem to have so much fun, just banter with the audience and, talking politics sometimes, and just really settling into the crowd that they're performing for, as opposed to someone like Willie Nelson, who I've seen a bunch too, who gets up there and talk about workmanlike. I mean, he gets up there and plays his songs and he leaves. And you're lucky to get one like interaction that acknowledges that he even knows what city he's in during the performance.
Thank you.
So what is it about Indigo Girls that you like in terms of being on stage with those musicians?
Right. Well, there's a lot, going on there. I think at the heart of it, and like I said, I work mostly with Amy, but I know Emily pretty well. But just that they're such excellent. I think they're unsung as songwriters, just excellent songwriters, song craftsmen. I'll put Amy up there with anybody. I mean, she's a fantastic songwriter. And then their general attitude about life is dead on with mine. Just their kind of philosophy about stuff, couldn't be better. It's interesting because they're the Indigo Girls. They're from the South and they have this different perspective on the South. And I know that we spend most of our time, if I'm touring with Amy and I'm playing with, those guys, it's almost exclusively down South. We're playing in Georgia and North Carolina and, you know what I mean? Florida,
Yeah.
And I have a great perspective about that stuff, and I think that people that don't travel, have these kind of preconceived notions that are just like, I don't know. I just think it's interesting, you know what I mean? To be able to live in that world and see the world through those eyes as well, I think it's really great. But at the base of it, they're just unbelievable songwriters. And they also come from a very interesting era, I think. This sort of from 87 to about 91 in sort of pop music. There was a really cool thing happening right there when Steve Earle was coming out, Chris Whitley, Indigo's, REM was happening. You know what I mean? There was this cool period right there. That was right before, if you kind of look past all the hair metal and stuff, there was this really cool singer-songwriter thing that was happening right there. Michelle Schacht, Katie Lang, all that cool country stuff that was happening right there with Dwight Yoakam and all that stuff. I really like that era, and they come out of that. And they personify a lot of that sort of that style of folk, pop, rock songwriting that was happening right there. And I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Tracy Chapman's another one.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I saw Tracy play. She opened for Bob Dylan at the Gorge. I think it was 88. And it was supposed to be the Alarm that opened for Bob Dylan. And they backed out.
The Alarm was cool, too.
They backed out at the last minute. It was Tracy Chapman. Nobody knew who Tracy Chapman was. But at the end of that show, it was like Tracy was better than Bob Dylan. I mean, it was fantastic.
He was great.
But
Hungry.
Your comments about the South are interesting because I used to live in Houston, Texas. I grew up in Washington, spent some time in Texas, came back, and I've traveled throughout the South. And I think there are some misconceptions and tropes, I don't know if that's what you would call them, about the South that are, they're founded in some degree of truth.
Absolutely.
But there's also,
as is any stereotype.
Right. And but there's also something that's unfair and missing from that analysis, because if you look at what's happening in Georgia right now, I mean, the fact that it flipped to a blue state, just kind of remarkable.
Right.
How did that happen? When you look at the makeup of any folks that are part of a southern state, you're going to have, maybe a 60-40 split at worst in terms of politics. But putting aside politics, you have a lot of important music that is coming out of southern states like Georgia and Texas and of course Tennessee and
arguably the most important music.
Right.
Arguably.
Yeah, and I know you have. I've listened to other interviews that you've done, and I know that you have a lot of respect for Southern musicians like Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner, and so I mean that's an important part of our musical history, and and
don't forget the soul stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
like the Stax, and I mean Motown was out of Detroit, but Memphis and I don't know, that whole area.
And the blues and Muscle Shoals and
Muscle Shoals is a big deal. Yeah.
Right. So this has been fun to digress. I don't even know what got us to this.
What are we talking about?
But it's and I think I started off asking you what you enjoy about playing with Indigo Girls, and that led you to the South, obviously, because that's where they came from.
Yeah. It's just an interesting perspective to see it through the eyes of of that scene, because they are a scene. The Indigo Girls are a scene, and they have very loyal fans.
Right,
no doubt about that. That is the truth.
So, I watched a little bit of "It's So Easy and Other Lies," the Duff McKagan documentary,
man.
And I saw you. I mean, you're right up there at the beginning. You're there in the documentary playing with Duff on stage, and how did that collaboration start, and when did you meet Duff?
Oh man, Duff was just hovering around because he lives out here. He splits time between Seattle and LA because he's from here. So was Nikki Sixx. There's a long history. But Duff, man, he is cool. Man, he is so just cool. Like classically rock and roll, punk rock cool. And he was just kind of around, man. I was just always in awe, because he would just be around. Whoa, dude, that's Duff McKagan. And I don't know. I was doing stuff, I was just kind of around. And I think just, he kind of, Duff is cool. And Mike's the same way. Mike McCready is the same way. They're like, they really are in it. They're looking for people. They're in the scene, participating, Certainly back then, this is like, whatever, sort of early 2000s into the early 2010s, and they're at the clubs and they're looking at bands and, you know what I mean? They really, and if they like somebody, they'll really help them out, and Duff is totally like that, And so, how did that thing happen? There was a bunch of stuff that was just kind of like these little one-offs that people would put together as kind of like a collaborative gig, and they were and sometimes there'd be a charity involved and whatever. There was a lot of that kind of stuff. And we were sort of both on those things at certain different times, or maybe, not really ever the same time, but we were just swimming in that same deal. And I remember getting a phone call from somebody going, "Hey man, Duff called me and he asked for your number." So that happened. And I'm like, okay, rad. And then one morning, really early, I got a phone call and it was a number I didn't recognize. And I was like, and I was all asleep. It was like 9:30. I had to sleep in, right? And, "Hey, this is Duff McKagan." I was like, give me a second. And I was like, and I tried to wake up and I was, "Hello." And he had just written the book. I can't remember if it had come out. I don't think it had come out yet, but it was being published and blah, blah, blah. And he told me about this whole idea about how he wanted to do a show. He wanted to read from the book, that exactly what it ended up coming out. And he's like, I'd like you to be a part of it. And I'm just like, dude, wow, really? That's incredible. Because we'd never really played before. We haven't really met properly before. I think we talked once or twice. But so when I got to know Duff, I went to his house, me and Jeff Rouse, the bass player in Loaded, who I knew a little bit too at the time. And I still do. But we went to Duff's house, and he read his life story in front of us while we played guitars and just kind of worked out that whole thing. Okay, maybe this song would go here, right? And so I'm getting to know this guy in his living room, telling me his life story, like officially. You know what I mean?
Jeez,
it was wild, man. Really, really cool. And he was
how
just
long
so
did that
gracious.
take?
Well, it was a 1.5 year process, like the whole thing, because we did a show that wasn't filmed at the Moore Theater. That was, kind of a different thing, but the same idea, And then eventually, so that went well, and everybody thought it was cool. It was just an interesting, idea. And man, that was awesome. And then they're like, okay, we're going to make a movie. And they got the thing together, and there's that whole thing, happened. And we did 2 nights at the Paramount that was put together from. And I got to learn a whole lot about, how those concert films are made and, and it was wow, what a treat. The rehearsals were great. The band was great. Everything about that period was just like lofty. That was when I was just kind of floating around, because I was also touring with Mark at that time. And yeah, those were heady days. I was feeling really good about everything. I still do, but it was a particularly good time when that was filmed. Yeah, totally. I remember it really well. Yeah.
It sounds
very
like,
fortunate.
Based upon your history and the history of other musicians I've interviewed, it sounds like there's really no way to manufacture a trajectory in music. It's 100% completely organic in terms of the people you meet, the strokes of luck of, who decides to pick up the phone and take a chance on you at any given moment. And, but I would imagine once it goes really well for an artist like Duff or Mark, that really just snowballs into other opportunities, because there's, like you say, Seattle's a small town, and you need people that you can trust, who aren't going to be starstruck and are going to be willing to do the work with focus and talent like you have.
Yeah, it's just all. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about anything, but I think it's important to always be prepared for anything, right?
Right.
And and before I was doing all of this stuff at anything that would be considered a successful level, I would just put myself into positions that were extremely uncomfortable, because I think everybody has a certain level of anxiety, talking in public or whatever it might be. You know what I mean? Certainly artists have a tendency to be sort of introverted type people, and then as a musician, your job is to go up on stage with all these lights on you and have everybody be quiet and look at you and listen to you. You know what I mean? So it's totally counterintuitive,
Right.
So I would put myself in these situations to make myself sort of getting more and more used to being in an uncomfortable situation, both physically, sort of in physical groups, and then artistically, like taking a lot of like chances and like putting myself in situations that were like, I don't know if I can pull this off, and then just seeing how it went, and sometimes I pulled it off and sometimes it didn't, but it was always it's always learning something, and so when it came time to jump in to some of these, higher end gigs, I felt like I had sort of prepared myself for that, just mentally, which is good, and then also just kind of knowing your role, not overplaying, not being a hot shot, but also when it's time to do something, you know what I mean? Lay it down,
Right.
And then back it up, and just kind of knowing where to, you got to know when to hold them, right? Know when to fold them.
Nice Kenny Rogers reference there. So throughout the 90s and through the early 2000s, were you actively writing songs that culminated in the Last Disguise solo album that you did? I think it was 2006 when that album came out.
That was 2006. So that was, that was early on. And that kind of led me into doing other things than being the front man. songwriting isn't my strong suit. It's just not. It's like I can write good music. The lyrics have always been a little bit tough for me. Although I have, a fair amount to say, So that record, was kind of, the last disguise. I didn't know what I was doing right then. I was just kind of, just seeing, well, I was in bands and stuff. And my brother told me, well, if this next band doesn't work out, you have to go solo. You have to promise me you'll do that, because he was just kind of sick of me just keep on going these circles. So I made that record for him, really.
Really?
Yeah, kind of. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, Gary, I'll go solo, And then I just found myself just disliking having to do all the other stuff. If you're the front guy, if you're the main guy, you know what I mean? You got to promote everything. You got to do this, and you got to, and like I said, I don't really want to be, looked at too much. You know what I mean? And I just didn't like it. So I almost kind of just dropped out. And so when I found myself working, that kind of next year into the next year after that, working with these really excellent songwriters and excellent, musicians, then I felt, oh, this is my place. So I felt much more comfortable in that, And then but it made it harder for me to write my own material, because I was hanging out with such brilliant, who I felt were brilliant songwriters,
right?
That I had no business, doing. I don't quite feel that way now. I feel like I can, I'm working on some solo stuff that I feel really good about, and I just think that the time is right for that thing. But it's never been, at least since then, it hasn't been my focus,
Yeah.
My focus has been, because I'm good at arranging and I'm good at band leading and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like putting together the thing and like, kind of,
Right.
orchestrating the thing and then laying in the cut, when it comes down to it, it's my kind of, I love Buddy Miller, who's out of Nashville. I don't know if you guys know who that is.
No.
He's one of my heroes. He's kind of like that guy, he is that guy. He's extremely successful in doing that particular job. Mm-hmm. And then he puts out his own records. But he's been the band leader for Robert Plant on some of those kind of rootsier stuff that he's done recently, And he's kind of one of those go-to guys, and and you don't know who he is. I love that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's
he just lays.
That's an interesting that's an interesting role that you've carved out for yourself as someone who, when you are involved in a project, you're very involved and in pulling levers and influencing the final product, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. But I think you answered my question, which I asked maybe early on in this interview, maybe 30 minutes ago, where I was asking you about your highest and best use in terms of songwriting and performing versus supporting a larger project. And that makes a lot of sense, but I do want to take issue with something you said. You said, I'm not a songwriter, or that's not my strong suit. I have listened to your solo album multiple times preparing for this interview, and I think it's fantastic.
Well, thanks.
I'm really glad that I found it and that I found you, because I'm going to add it to my playlist. There's clearly, I'm always listening for influences, and I hear some influences in there, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. But Nick Drake with the drop D on, I think, was it The Last Disguise where you had it was at the drop D?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's in D. It's
just an D tuning. Yeah. And
open tuning.
And there's also, like, you can just hear some really fun influences, like the Black Crowes on some of the more upbeat songs, and Tom Waits in there too. I mean, it's really fun to kind of pick apart an album like that. But at the end, you realize this is utterly Jeff Fielder, and it's a unique voice, and it's your voice, and it's your songs. So I do take issue with your characterization of your songwriting abilities. It's, but speaking of songwriting and solo projects, I know that your project with your wife, Tekla, is not a solo project necessarily, but tell us about that album, how that came together, and what your plans are in terms of future projects with your wife and perhaps touring.
Yeah. So, when we met in 2015. Yeah. Wow. It's been a while now. we've been married for 3 years now. And, you know, she's a musician properly and working and all that stuff. And then at the very beginning of our relationship, I almost wanted to keep it separate because I just didn't want it to go there for whatever reasons. You know, it might get complicated, blah, blah, blah. But that didn't last very long. And we ended up making a record together. And what's cool about working with Tekla is that she writes excellent songs and she just kind of trusts me to, you know, kind of put them together in a way, you know. So that first record we made together is called When the Curtain Falls, or just Curtain Falls. And it's really electronic. I was just kind of into drum machines and keyboards and sequencing and stuff like that. And she just kind of let me roll with it. So that record is kind of in that way. And we made another record together that was a bit more organic, a little bit more band oriented. And then 2020 hit, right? And so we didn't put it out. And then we just kind of sat there and waited for, you know, the next shoe to drop, which it was on a daily basis back then. Mm-hmm. And so we had moved into this house a year earlier in 19, about March of 19. And I was able to turn this room into a recording studio.
Nice.
And then when 2020 hit, you know, it was, thank goodness we had this room because we were able to do, you know, really good streaming. I could do sessions out of here. People would send me stuff, remote stuff, and I could just basically do anything, you know. And as it went, I kind of built it up a little bit and we're able to do drums and stuff. And I can play good enough drums to where we made an album during that period, starting in about April, maybe March or April of 2020, writing the material and then recording it. And then, you know, the whole idea was to get it, you know, once we were in it, was to release it before the election. That was the idea. And we did. We were able to do all of that work. It was the fastest we've ever made anything. And I played all the instruments, and except for what Tekla did.
Right.
Said we had one guest. We had Keith Lowe play upright bass, which was amazing. And that record is really cool. And it kind of is going to inform the way, you know, because, you know, it was all done here. And, you know, I was just really proud of that whole thing. It's called Trouble in Time.
Yeah.
It's, you know, anywhere you find music nowadays. Trouble in Time and I put my name on it. So it was both of us, Tekla Waterfield and Jeff Fielder.
Yeah.
And I find it a lovely record.
It is. It's a great album. It's a great album. If you like Cowboy Junkies, which I was a huge fan of Cowboy Junkies back in the day and saw them live, you know, the melancholy, you know, just how comfortable you both are with melancholy as a vibe in songs. But also there's a lot of catchy choruses too that kind of distinguish this album apart from bands like Cowboy Junkies, which are just pure. I mean, there's almost no pop whatsoever in Cowboy Junkies. It's all melancholy. Yeah. But I really enjoyed it, and glad I got to listen to it to prepare. So
I think that
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that like people, it's tough, and I was hoping that this might turn around, and it kind of went the other direction. But, you know, everything needs to be really loud now and really in your face and really like dramatic and ba 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 ba. You know what I mean? And I really felt that we needed to make a deliberate, quiet, sparse, you know what I mean? Laid back statement in all of this chaos, you know? And I was hoping that people might, you know, I don't think it's going to go that way. I think it's going exactly the other way, where everything needs to be louder and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is a bummer to me. That's one thing I'm really bummed out about.
I think
we could use some introspection, you know, some like, some reflection, maybe. That would be nice. A little bit of self-awareness would be good. But
I agree.
Who am I to say?
I heard Bo Burnham talking about this subject in an interview recently, and Bo Burnham is the comedian who put out that concert album.
Very aware.
That he recorded in the pandemic. But he talked about this concept of everybody wanting to express an opinion as loudly as possible about every subject possible, and to be heard in every possible social media platform, and just the noise that it creates. I can see why and this is what's so refreshing about albums like Trouble in Time is, that minimalism of just like settling into being comfortable with quiet and pause and, just what's in between the lines sometimes is just as important or more important as the lines themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I like that guy that you're talking about, Bo. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be nice to have some more voices like that. I just think that there needs to be kind of a balance. If everybody's screaming at each other all the time, then nobody gets hurt. And so it just, I don't know. I just wish there was a bit more, understanding. And I think there might be. I just think that what we're kind of exposed to, is just chaotic, and I don't think that's good for us as a species.
Right.
But again, who am I to say? You know what I mean?
Well, I think, I think what's happening right now with bringing music back and bringing live performance back safely with Vax-only performances, like we saw at Sleight of Hand Cellars the other night, and I got to see you and Al Johannes perform live. That was fantastic.
It was cool.
But, I felt a renewed sense of hope when I was there, even though I was still kind of freaked out, just like looking around. I know this is Vax-only, but just bringing all these people together, seeing live music, and what happens when you do that, for me anyway, is all of the background, all of the noise of politics and bullshit just sort of disappears. And for a short period of time, you're just in the exact same space as a bunch of other people who have way different opinions than you do. But you're there experiencing this collective experience, a shared experience. And to see you up there with your two SGs, talk about minimalism. It's just you and two SGs. What a special performance that was. And how did that come together anyway? How did you get invited to perform at Sleight of Hand Cellars?
Oh, it was pretty simple. I just got a text, I think, from this guy, Steffo, who I'm assuming is kind of Alan's guy. He just books his stuff, or I don't even know really. I met him, playing with Lanegan, and Alan and Mark go way, way back.
Right.
They make all those records together and all that stuff, and I've known Alan for a really long time now. I don't know. I guess they just were like, hey, we're going to do this gig. You want to open? I mean, it was that simple. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. There originally was going to be two gigs. But it was just the one. It ended up, for whatever reason, I don't know. The second one got canceled. For, everything's getting canceled. Who knows? You know what I mean? But luckily that one stayed. And, and I didn't really talk to him at all after that until the day of, and I just had to, work out my set. Just spent a week doing.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
It went great. It was inspiring for me too. Absolutely. It was great. It was a new day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to your frontman comments, I mean, I really think that you have the voice, you have the songwriting skills, you have the performance skills to be the frontman, but I totally respect your comfort zone to just, maybe that's not what you're going to aspire to do over the next 10 years, as much as be part of a, bigger collaboration with other bands. But it was really fun to see you perform.
Well, thanks. I think it could be. I'm not exactly sure what the future holds exactly. I want to be more in a producer role, coming up here. But, I think when I made Last Disguise back then, it was on the beginning of all of this stuff that leads us to now. You know what I mean? And so now it's just kind of a different position, a different experience. You know what I mean? And, I could feel probably really good about it now, I mean, that's it's a whole lifetime worth of experience between then and now. Done a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, and I always had kind of an identity crisis, as far as not a crisis, but, it was like exactly who do I want to be musically? Most artists really that are successful have a very distinct voice and they go this way and their music right away. And I never really had that, you know what I mean? I wanted to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And the bands I was in, leading up to that solo record were kind of all over the place. We would do, this kind of music and that kind of music. And it was just like confusing for people, I think, and that's why it was so good to be able to play with Mark, because I love that kind of darker rock style of music. And then on the flip side, playing with Amy, which is way more, Americana roots, acoustic oriented, and being able to do both of those things, was really, it made my insides good, that whole time.
Do you also play mandolin on her albums? I was wondering.
Yeah, she plays mandolin, but I do play mandolin, yes. She actually forced me to play mandolin. She's the reason I'm playing mandolin.
That's funny. I bought a mandolin
I got one
recently,
and I figured it out.
I'm just still trying to learn it myself. It's I guess
it's upside down, so it's a little weird.
Yeah, once you know guitar and you understand, how the strings are arranged, it's a little easier to figure out. But the size of my fingers is just really difficult.
I know, it's so tiny.
Like a little midget guitar.
It's weird that such a big sound comes from such a tiny instrument.
Yeah.
When you hear it recorded, it's just like, gosh, this is a big sound.
So,
anyway.
Did I read correctly that you were involved in scoring the film Hickok?
Yeah.
So
how'd you know that?
Well,
that's weird.
I don't know where I saw that, but I looked at I think I looked you up on IMDb and I saw music by. So how did that come together?
Well, it was Andrew Jocelyn that, got the credit for, scoring that record. But so it was his gig. Andrew Jocelyn's a violinist, virtuoso, and he does everybody's string arrangements around here. In fact, he did the string arrangements on Imitations, at Lanegan record. And like I said, it's kind of a small town. And also he's the leader of the quartet in the Duff movie. It's
okay.
Easy.
Yeah. Is that a direction that you are open to going in the future in terms of, more musical side gigs?
That would be awesome. But, you know what I mean? I mean, it's just like anything else. You kind of need the connections and, I would do that all the time. Because that stuff is pretty, well, I don't want to say it's easy. But I have the means to do it here. I have every instrument, and the stuff that I can't play, I can farm out pretty easily. You know what I mean? So yeah, if anybody wants a score, let me know, man, because I can hook it up. And we did some stuff recently where it was just there's a friend of mine, Ryan Burns. He's a great keyboard player, and he got hooked up with some distributor thing where you can just send them random tracks and they'll try to place them, these instrumental things, because every reality TV show uses these, these kind of random things. Mm-hmm. And we were able to crank out like 8 of them in a day, and I was like, man, if this was a thing, oh my gosh, it'd be amazing. Because we find it pretty easy just to come up with these sort of instrumental things, and it can be, let's make a moody vibe or a dark vibe or a happy vibe, you know what I mean? And we just do them and they come out really well,
That's awesome.
But yeah, I would like to do that. But mostly I kind of just want to do cool records. I want to do things that kind of mean something. But I would do any sort of placement stuff any day, to make the ends meet.
Right. So what is the main challenge as you see it right now, today in 2021, for musicians? And we have the obvious one, which is the pandemic and the shutdown of venues and the difficulty in bringing people out to see live music or getting, we've got that. But aside from the pandemic, what are the challenges for folks wanting to get into music and maybe thinking they want to make a career of it in terms of making a living and retirement and just the logistics of surviving as a musician?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, you can't separate it. You can't separate it out of the climate we're in, as far as all of that stuff,
right?
Because it's impossible to make long-term plans. I have no idea where this is going to go. A year ago, I kind of was able to sort of predict things as they were coming, and I was right a lot of the time, But now I have no idea, man, how this is going to shake out. It's so weird. And it's almost as if it's specifically targeted to musicians, isn't it?
Yeah.
And lighting guys and just like touring and all of that stuff. It's just like so, it's just so weird that it's like the music industry and concerts in general, like live performance in general, is just like, man, really taking the hit on this thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is, it just is what it is, as well as being an impossible way of life and a really difficult thing to get into and a really difficult thing to keep going, because of, there's a myriad of reasons, taste change, I mean, who plays guitar, right? You know what I mean? Everybody used to play guitar. I think people still do play guitar, but you know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know, because it takes so much sort of focus and I don't know. There's a myriad of challenges. I talked to a sort of a Zoom meeting of students recently, and they were asking me for advice, and I'm just like, man, I used to be able to give pretty good advice. I don't know anymore. I just don't know how it's going to go. I think that like recording is good, and kind of getting to know your way around some recording softwares, which I think is, certainly where we're headed as far as that kind of thing goes. I think that there hopefully might be a resurgence in sort of the album, I don't know though. I don't see any really evidence of that. I'm just kind of like wishful thinking, but you know what I mean? Where people would listen to a piece of music from front to back, like the Dark Side of the Moon or the Sgt. Pepper or something like that. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I just don't know, man.
Well, at least you're being honest. I think if you said you did know, everybody would be a little bit skeptical.
Nobody knows anything.
Yeah. Well, it's sad. It's sad to think about music in terms of career opportunities for young people, but I think young people are so adaptable to changing circumstances. I can see, I think live gigs and live performances are going to, like we're seeing with the Seahawks, just requiring masks, requiring vaccination proof, that type of thing. I can see music venues doing the same thing. They're already starting to do it. And maybe that's the first step toward normalizing going back to see live music again. And then it just becomes, masks become part of the experience, and so does, vaccination requirement. And then we can get back to hopefully some semblance of normal in terms of what it's like to exist as a musician.
I think, again, I don't know anything, but I think that by the time we get to a normal, nobody's going to remember what normal was like. I swear. Everybody's going to be like, what normal are you talking? Which normal are you talking about? You know what I mean? Everybody's going to have their own definition of what normal is.
That's fine.
Because it's going to take a minute, man, I think. But I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic. And one thing about younger people is me and Tekla put a band together for some stuff that we're going to do and this next recording that we're going to do. And they're all in their 20s. And it's kind of like everything else. People have these sort of general, assumptions about things, and everybody's, I don't know, not everybody, but like a lot of older people are kind of like, oh, the new generation, this and that, blah, blah, blah. I sound like some old codger, man. The kids are just fine. The kids are all right. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're and awesome. These musicians are amazing. You know what I mean? They totally get it. There's no like big, huge disconnect and all of this stuff. I just find that just ridiculous. These kids are going to be just fine.
No, I agree with you. And I've talked to a lot of my guests who are our age. I've talked to about that concept of just the trash talking of younger generations, that they don't have a work ethic, and it's I think
it's just all baloney, man.
It is, and I think what they have is they have a value system that is way more evolved and appropriate than the sort of entrenched values that, for instance, I'm a trial lawyer by day, and it was, always the my boss telling me you need to be the first one there, the last one to leave. I don't care if you're working when you're here. It's about, optics. And I think what younger people are telling us is they're willing to put in hard work, but not for optics reasons. They want to be practical and, give me 8 hours of work. And if I can get it done in 6 hours, I'm going to get it done in 6 hours. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm working for the last 2. And I love that value system. It's like, let's, in terms of their sensitivities and their cultural sensitivities, I'm all about that. So I like it.
Yeah, me too. It's just like, hey, man, we made all this stuff up in the first place. People forget that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Human beings made all this shit up. You know what I mean? So what's the problem in switching it up a little bit? You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's all, it's just, we made it all up.
Yeah.
All of it.
So true.
So, I think that in essence, a lot of things are, everybody's got an opinion and some things get overstated and overblown over here and over there or whatever, But in essence, the idea is just like, I call bullshit. I call bullshit on that thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if nobody ever did that, where would we be?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
The whole moving this thing forward, it's happening a little fast now, which is, I think it's all right, man. I just think that people need to chill out, honey bunny.
That'll be the quote at the beginning of your podcast, by the way. These people need to chill out, honey bunny. But I would be remiss. We're going to wrap things up here. But
cool.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your go-to electric guitar or guitars and your go-to acoustics in terms of your home. What's that guitar that you pick up most of the time, electric and acoustic?
Okay. Well, I have a fair amount of guitars. I'm trying to see what's around here. With an acoustic guitar, because I generally like old stuff, vintage things, I just do, I like the way they feel. However, with acoustic guitars, for whatever reason, I prefer newer ones. And I don't exactly know why that is, but I have a Martin, kind of a modern, it's probably a 2012 OM21, and it's a fantastic acoustic guitar. I just love it. I got it specifically because I had a Martin D28 for years, and it was just too boomy, and it needed to record. I needed something that recorded really, really well, just every time, just easy. And this was the one that I ended with, and it's great. And I don't need a bunch of acoustic guitars,
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of guitars, but they all are very specific. They all do different things. And then, so my main guitar for years and years and years, which I didn't even have another one, was this Les Paul that I got when I was 13, when we first moved to Washington. It's just a Les Paul Standard from 1988. And that's kind of it was considered my sort of main guitar until I started buying guitars. But now that SG that you mentioned, I could show it to you really quick. Let me go grab it. If I had a main ride, put my headphones back on, it would probably be this special. It's a 64, and it's real checked up.
Wow.
It's a good looking guitar.
64. Nice.
And it's just awesome. I love it.
That's a beautiful guitar.
It was a great find.
Mm-hmm.
And so when in doubt, I'll play that. It just, it tends to be, it's not my main thing, but it's just like it always works. It works with anything. I can play it on any style of music. It's rad. It stays in tune.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfectly intonated, and it's a dope guitar. It's just cool. You know what I mean?
Right.
But then a lot of times I'll play a Telecaster because it calls for a Telecaster. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I were to choose two, it'd be the 64 SG and then the Telecaster over there, which is just kind of a regular, nothing special, 52 reissue that's
Right.
beat up because I beat it up. It's relic for real.
Yeah. I think I saw you playing the Telly on the Emerald City Guitars video.
Oh yeah, that was when they demoing their guitars. Yeah, I was trying to do that for a minute, like be a guitar demo guy. And then 2020 threw a wrench in everything, So I haven't done anything like that since then. But those guys are great down there, man. And Emerald City Guitars, shout out.
Yeah, I've never.
Jay Boone, Trevor Boone.
I follow them on Instagram, but I've never been in.
Amazing place. It's like a museum
Yeah.
more than a store. Yeah, it's like a guitar museum.
Yeah, it's dangerous. I just can't go in there with a credit card. I'd have to leave all of my financial, abilities to buy.
well,
He's just behind as I walked into that place.
Yeah, times,
Well,
but it's cool. Yeah.
Jeff, it has been so fun to talk to you, and it's been a history lesson, but also a great way to get to know, someone who's just part of the fabric of Pacific Northwest music over the last several decades. So thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. A pleasure. Absolutely.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle @DreamPathPod. And as always, go find your dream path.